Hey, what's up? As a non religious guy, this is something that I've encountered talking to a lot of religious people enough. God of the gaps. And it's basically when you debate or have a discussion about God, blah, 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 getting a religious person to try to, justify their position. And basically, they say something along the lines of, like, oh, he's just God. Essentially, like, that's the argument. Like, oh, you just have to have faith, which I find really, really ironic because a lot of these people are the ones that tell non religious people, such as myself, that, like, oh, it's impossible that the world could have just come from nothing. Well, why not? Like, you need faith to substitute things about God that you're not able to explain because you yourself admit that God is just this, like, higher being, and there's no way for a human to, comprehend God's, legitimacy and his intellect because we're, far less in between. So basically, the way I see it, God of the gaps is basically pretty convenient because if religious people aren't able to justify themselves, they can just talk about God's supreme nature and supposed, supreme being as an excuse to not have to, like, justify themselves. But yet, when they do think they can make an argument, they'll yap and yap and yap. So they basically use it as, like, some sort of, like, escape patch. But because non-religious people such as myself are actually willing to try and, like, explain our position, we don't have a god to, like, back ourselves, like, up to. And then all of a sudden they want to act like, oh, see, you can't even say anything. Well, motherfucker, when you're talking about faith and just, oh, we can't question God or, like, whatever, you're not saying anything either. So, like, in a way, how are you even, like, that different? And, like, okay, my position is that life is meaningless. You need God because you need to feel like life is, meaningful and all that kind of stuff. I would argue that because the universe is meaningless, it doesn't require that it makes sense for you. That's why people make up meaning. That's why people make up, like, passion and all this kind of shit, even though we're basically just rotting and, like, waiting to die. None of this basically actually matters. So essentially, you need to have faith in God in order for it to work because there are things about God that you can't explain because, by your admission, God is superior in the sense that he's omnipotent and he's omniscient, which is things that non perfect humans such as ourselves, we don't possess those things. But, like, essentially, I don't need to have faith, hypothetically, that the universe came from nothing because if it did, then it still remains the same. You need faith for God to work. Even if you want to switch this around and be like, oh, you need faith that the universe came from nothing because you don't want to be punished if God were to be real and you didn't, accept him and all his conditions, blah, 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 this and that. But I mean, like, okay, if you're able to say that it's impossible for the universe to have, like, come from nothing because you're treating nothing as, literally nothing, something that can't interact with, like, anything, then nothingness has nothing to do with me whatsoever. So I don't need faith to believe that the universe came from nothing. Nobody needs faith for the universe to come from nothing because, okay, by the logic in which you say that the universe couldn't have come from nothing, it has nothing to do with me. So therefore, if it has nothing to do with me, I can safely say that life has no meaning and nothing actually matters. So, if you want to pull this crap, then I really suggest that, like, you do better because you finding it absurd that the universe to come from nothing, let's say, is no different than you saying, oh, I have faith. Because as long as I use the special word of faith, I'm justified to believe whatever I want and I don't have to explain anything, blah, 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 blah. I mean, like, get over yourself. I don't really get how believing that the universe was an accident, a random chance, or, like, a random coincidence isn't more of an explanation than God, because to me it indicates that understanding such a thing is that anything that you project is simply that, a projection. Believing in God, I would say, requires you by default to be a pseudo-intellectual, because you admit that there's a big chunk of your ideology that you don't understand, but that's okay because you have faith, right? I mean, you have faith for the stuff that you need to compensate for. Whereas believing in nothing, reaching a point of, like, nihilism is just that. Whatever. It's nothing. It's not a big deal. You just die and there's no point to life, so whatever.